another one that came up, which is blatant Russian GPS jamming. Okay, so there is a lot of misinformation in this article. Hang on, is it off the wires? Not necessarily. Yeah, off the wires and on the BBC article as well, which talks about it. Okay, basically presenting the allegations from Ukrainian officials as fact. It is Russians that that shot the other dude, etc. They're slamming it all together. So the BBC article, I think, was like, I really did not like the way this was written because it was full of technical errors and assumptions that were then driven as fact when they're pretty much opinion. Now, GPS jamming, denial of space ops. This has been a known problem ever since GPS was released for civilian use. People are like, oh no, GPS is this wonder solution that's impossible to blah, blah, blah. Okay, at the end of the day, you've got the satellites out in Earth orbit that are transmitting a timing signal. That's all they do. They transmit a timing signal. It is up to the receiver to use the ephemeris data of the satellite constellations to then interpret based off the timing signal received and the deltas to then solve for a position. That's how that works. GPS won't tell you where you are. It just tells you what time it is. And the receiver then uses that to solve for where it is, using the ephemeris of where the satellite was at the time. And the GPS ground stations help with position keeping of the satellites and ensuring timing signals are accurate, because time drift induces an error in position and everything else. So the whole concept of denial of space ops is basically removing the ability of an adversary to use Satcom, satellite-based services, which includes GPS-type services, video uplinks, data uplinks, basically anything that goes onto a satellite. Trying limiting them to basically going back to old school methods, using terrestrial radio services, fixed comms links, that sort of thing, in general. Connections that are generally lower bandwidth. If you can't put the modern battlefield through it, then you're at a disadvantage. If you're missing your GPS, your fancy high-tech weapon systems won't be as accurate. You've got to then rely on slower navigation systems. You've got to, positional keeping is going to be degraded, all that sort of stuff. Now, there was a push, probably really accelerated about 20 years ago now, to retire a lot of radio nav aids for aviation, because the upkeep for them was costly, and a lot of people were flying GPS type, well, they were procedures, and they were saying, oh, these are high precision procedures, but it's like, well, the ability to suppress the GPS signal is actually rather easy. It's a timing signal. Now, you can overcome that through antenna design, through digital signal processing. You know what a timing signal looks like, therefore you can pick out the signal from the background noise. You can use more directional antennas to ignore terrestrial sources, which is where your denial of space ops normally happens. You put a high-powered transmitter on frequency in the vicinity, it's going to suppress receipt of the signals. That's how you jam GPS. Now, DSP and smarter handsets and smarter receiving devices can ignore that, can burn through, etc. But if you can't catch the signal where you can't get a GPS solution. Denial of space ops was talked about and practiced in the military for years. And even at the time in aviation, there's this push towards GPS or GPS integrated systems as primary nav solutions. The militaries, global militaries, were practicing denial of space ops. You can, there should be evidence still around of aviation safety reporting, or of people who encountered GPS dropouts, in part because of ongoing military exercises and things in the area. People were getting a handle on how much jammed a region, how far that region extended, all that sort of stuff. And the idea of denial of space ops, some people were like, no, we'll always have space. Yeah, right. Not really. It's like a warship afloat. If a warship loses a satellite connection or some sort of airborne relay, they can't see that far. They're limited to some really low-rate communication solutions if they lack satellite relays and things like that. It's amazing how blind a ship gets when that information disappears. But anyway, they're talking about aviation here. So they're talking about GPS jamming. The fact that there's GPS or denial of space ops going on in Ukraine, and particularly in the eastern regions, should not be a surprise to anyone. I think both sides will be actively attempting to deny space to the other. Now, Starlink is in space, so that seems to be working relatively well in Ukraine, but denying the military access to space, it's another theatre of combat. It's another domain for warfighting. You want to deny land, you want to deny air, you want to deny sea, you want to deny space. If you take space away from them, like I said, their precision weapons go away. You're not going to be able to lob weapons hundreds of miles reliably without that sort of highly accurate navigation system, because the non-space-based nav systems aren't going to give you that degree of accuracy in a weapon over that range. Right. So, having encountered denial of space ops, i.e. GPS jamming of some degree, having to rely on paper maps or fallback procedures, it's painted as being, there's a big problem. Okay, so there's no proof who jammed, but there's a lot of, Russia did this, it's Russian hostile actions. It's like, further down the article, it's like, there are some who do, okay. The UK Civil Aviation Authority told the BBC that aircraft's complex navigation systems do not solely rely on GPS. No, but I have looked at integration of nav systems and the trust that is applied in the quality of a source. GPS tends to be trusted without fail. And if you get a split between your GPS solution and a NavAid solution, you're going to trust the GPS solution and assume the NavAid has had issues. And there is coming a generation of pilots who don't have of aviators who don't have the skilling in aerial navigation procedures and ability to assess and interpret, well, not only the systems, but nav solutions and their accuracy and what they represent, how they're formed, who don't have the grounding in that, and so will blindly follow an incorrect solution. Now, I don't agree necessarily with what the CAA has to say here. There is a degree of extreme tight integration, and that the CAA basically says, yep, okay, it is a byproduct of military activity and may not be deliberate actions. So it's spent the first half of the article basically saying Russia is terrible because they've done this jamming, but there is no proven link between Russia and the rise of GPS jamming. So what's the point of the article then? The article is, okay, there was a GPS fail on the aircraft carrying the EU's head, and basically they had to land using charts or approach plates. Wow. Okay. Seriously, non-event. Just because you have to land using the things, they're painting these things. They're building an inflammatory rhetoric that doesn't need to exist. Now, I'm not saying that to say, oh, this is a pro-Russian stance. No, it's a pro-common sense stance. A lot of nations have the ability to deny space, to jam that signal. It could have even been a temporary outage of the satellite. It says up here that the Bulgarian government confirmed that during the flight, the satellite signal transmitting information to the plane's GPS navigation system was neutralized. Okay. What does GPS transmit? It is a pure timing signal. All right, I think you've got people making statements that only partially understand the tech, and now it's being run with as gospel. To ensure the flight safety, air control services immediately offered an alternate landing method using terrestrial nav systems. Yeah, it's called standard procedures. And, well, quite clearly the Kremlin are like, yeah, no, you're full of crap. And here we go. We're now aligning a noticeable increase in GPS jamming, GPS incidents to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That the Baltic nations, yeah, okay, quite clearly they don't like Russia, quite clearly. This one is more interesting though. GPS spoofing, in which legitimate signals are replaced with fake ones indicating a false location. Okay, again, let's go back to how GPS works. It is a timing signal. Now, the only way I can see this working is if someone's somehow magically been able to get on the frequency that the satellite was using, but only induced just enough error in the signal that the receiver still accepted the ephemeris data as accurate, and so basically it accepted that the satellite was still seen as roughly in the right position, but there was enough of an error in the signal received to then induce a positional error in the positional solution that it generated. It doesn't, you don't draw off GPS like you would a nav, like a VOR, an NDB, or those are much harder to draw off because, again, NDB is easy because it's just a radio beacon. You can draw those off easy enough. VOR is a bit harder because you've got timing signals and blah, 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 blah. TACANs, DMEs, etc., similar sort of issue. It's a bit harder to falsify and draw off inducing false locations that way. It's it's very, very difficult to provide a technical reason for why that is. For someone says, oh, my GPS was spoofed and I've got a false position. Okay. You need to then explain, using the concepts of how GPS works, how that is possible. And then once you've explained how that is possible, you then need to explain how you would go about and do that in the real world. And 99.9 times out of 100, these things are going to fail because there's no feasible way that could be done. Now, theoretically, you could maybe bench test your way into a solution, into a problem like that, but it then comes down to the quality of the receiving unit, what they're doing. Now, the bandwidth, the operating bands, yep, they're possibly swamped with signals from all sorts of places. So interference on those bands can happen all the time. But again, it comes back to the quality of the digital signal processing that's going on, of the unit's ability to pull stuff out of being accurate. Is it possible that the RAF plane was fitted with a substandard kit that doesn't do that? Well, quite possibly. Who knows how old that equipment could have been. And so it may have lacked some of the robust elements. So, yeah, I would be more inclined to say that there would have been errors in the integrated terrestrial nav solution, and what the aircraft encountered was probably the onboard nav system trying to reconcile the difference between the data sources it was receiving and making a best guess as to where it was. I mean, and there's no indication of whether it's just transient, how long it's like, yep, okay, fine. And this whole thing of like, just because GPS goes away doesn't mean you don't know how to fly through the sky. Well, quite clearly, people like to say that no GPS means they don't know what to do when they go home. It's just inflammatory rhetoric being reinforced by people who aren't as competent at their jobs as they should be. Okay, but the reality is that's the nav system everyone relies on now. Sorry, the positional referencing system that everyone relies on now. GPS is not a be-all and end-all. All it can do is it can tell you where you are. It can't tell you where you're going. You've got to rely on other elements to do that. Some sort of inertial measurement unit, some sort of stored heading and speed function that basically projects your position forward, okay, or projects where you've been. All the GPS can really do is tell you exactly where you are right now and therefore build a history plot of where you've been. It's that forward projection, which is the navigation element, which is based on platform heading, speed, etc. inputs. Yeah, GPS can't tell you that other stuff. You can guess based on your historic progress, but fundamentally that's a feature of the receiving unit, not a feature of the system. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.